My beloved child, stop scrolling for a moment. Do not let your finger move past these words yet, because in this fictional message, something happened last night that has the power to change the way you have been interpreting everything. Someone saw your soulmate. They were not alone, and the moment that person realized who was standing beside them, they knew this was not an ordinary meeting. Before fear rushes into your heart, breathe. Before jealousy creates a story that may not be true. Listen, because what was seen from a distance is only the surface of what happened. There is a deeper reason your soulmate was there. There is a hidden conversation behind that encounter. And there is one detail about the person they were with that nobody expected to discover. Stay with me, my beloved child, because the first thing you are about to learn may completely change the question you have been asking. You have been asking, who were they with? But heaven is asking you to consider something deeper. Why did they meet? That question opens the door, because last night was not simply about companionship. It was about information. It was about something your soulmate has been trying to understand, something that has been bothering them quietly, something connected to a chapter they thought they had already closed. For a while, your soulmate had been carrying an uneasy feeling. They could not explain it. Everything around them appeared normal. They went through their routine. They spoke to people. They smiled when they needed to smile. They answered messages. They continued with life. But inside, there was a question that refused to disappear, a question about you. They wondered whether they had misunderstood something. They wondered whether the story they had accepted years ago was actually the complete truth. And last night, that question finally became too loud to ignore. That is why they went. That is why they met someone. That is why someone else happened to see them. And that is why you are hearing this story now. Imagine the scene. It is late. The world has become quieter. Streetlights are reflecting across the windows. People are returning home. Most of the city is unaware that anything important is happening. But your soulmate is sitting across from someone they have known for a long time. The conversation begins carefully. There is no laughter, no carefree energy, no romantic atmosphere. Instead, there is hesitation. Your soulmate keeps looking at the other person as if trying to determine whether they are finally going to tell the truth. The person sitting across from them knows why they were invited. They know this conversation has been coming. They also know that once they answer the first question, they may not be able to control what happens afterward. Your soulmate finally speaks. What really happened? 4 words, simple, but those 4 words carry years of confusion behind them. The other person does not answer. They look away. Your soulmate waits. Then they ask again, what really happened between us? And suddenly, the conversation is no longer about the present. It is about the past, about you, about the moment when everything changed, about the moment your soulmate decided to pull away, about the things they were told, about the things they believed, about the things they were never allowed to hear from you directly. And here is where the mystery begins. Because the person your soulmate met last night was not necessarily a romantic interest. They were someone who knew something. Something your soulmate needed to know. Something connected to you. Something that had been hidden behind a completely different explanation. Your soulmate had been told a story. Maybe it was that you had moved on. Maybe they were told that you never truly wanted the relationship. Maybe someone convinced them that your feelings were temporary. Maybe they were told you had chosen someone else. Whatever the exact story was, your soulmate believed it enough to walk away. But belief is not always truth. Sometimes belief is simply the conclusion a frightened heart reaches after receiving incomplete information. And last night, your soulmate began discovering that some of the information they received may have been incomplete. That realization did not make them happy. It hurt, because when you discover that the past may have been different from what you believed, you have to revisit memories you thought you had already buried. Your soulmate remembered the last time they saw you. They remembered your face, your voice, your silence. They remembered something you said that they once interpreted one way. Now they were wondering if it meant something completely different. They remembered the moment they decided not to reach out. They remembered the person who advised them, and suddenly that advice sounded different. That is the danger of truth. It does not only change the present, it rearranges the past. A sentence that once sounded like rejection can suddenly sound like pain. A goodbye that once sounded final can suddenly sound like fear. A silence that once looked like indifference can suddenly reveal how deeply someone was hurting. And your soulmate may be standing inside that realization right now. But there is more. The person they met last night did not immediately admit everything. They tried to protect someone. They tried to choose their words carefully. They said, "I don't know if I should tell you." Your soulmate immediately knew, because people rarely say that when there is nothing important to reveal. They leaned forward. They asked, "What aren't you telling me?" Silence, again. Then the person across from them finally said something that made your soulmate freeze. "There is something you never knew about that time." That sentence changed the atmosphere, because your soulmate had spent so long believing they understood what happened. They thought they knew why the relationship ended. They thought they knew what you felt. They thought they knew why you never came back. But now someone was telling them that there was a missing piece, and that missing piece had your name attached to it. My beloved child, this is where you must resist the temptation to assume the worst. Because the person sitting beside your soulmate last night may actually have been connected to the truth you have been waiting to understand. They may have been a witness, a former confidant, a family connection, an old friend, someone who was close enough to know what happened behind closed doors. And the reason your soulmate chose them was because they had finally realized something. The people they had trusted were not giving them answers. So they went directly to someone who might. That takes courage, especially when pride is involved. Your soulmate had to admit that they did not know everything. They had to admit that they needed answers. They had to risk hearing something painful. And they did. The conversation continued. The other person began describing a night from the past, a night when your name was mentioned, a night when someone made a decision about your relationship, a night when your soulmate was influenced by information they believed was trustworthy. But there was something missing from that story. One sentence, one piece of context, one fact that was never passed along. And that missing detail could explain why your soulmate made the decision they made. It could explain the distance, the silence, the sudden withdrawal, the strange change in behavior that you never understood. You may have thought their heart changed, but what if their understanding changed first? What if someone gave them a reason to believe they needed to walk away? What if they believed they were protecting themselves from a future heartbreak? What if they were actually running away from something that never existed? This is why last night matters. Because your soulmate was not simply meeting someone. They were testing the story. They were asking questions. They were trying to determine whether their memory of the past was accurate. And the answers were beginning to disturb them. At one point, the person across from them reached into a bag. They pulled out an old phone. Your soulmate recognized it. That phone contained conversations from a time when everything between you was changing. The person hesitated. Then they said, "I kept this because I knew one day you would ask." Your soulmate stared at the phone. They asked, "Ask what?" The person did not answer immediately. Instead, they unlocked the screen. They scrolled past old conversations, past names, past dates, past messages. Then they stopped. Your soulmate leaned closer. Something was on the screen. Something written around the exact time your relationship began falling apart. It was not your name. It belonged to someone else. Someone they trusted. Someone they never imagined would have been involved. The person sitting across from them said quietly, "You were told something about them that wasn't the whole truth." Your soulmate looked up. They asked, "Who told me?" The answer did not come, not yet. The person was afraid of what would happen after they said the name, afraid of destroying relationships, afraid of being blamed, afraid that once the truth came out, there would be no way to put the past back where it was. But your soulmate had reached the point where they could not accept another silence. They said, "Tell me." The person finally did, and the moment the name was spoken, your soulmate stopped moving, because that name belonged to someone they had trusted deeply. Someone whose advice had shaped their decision. Someone who had told them that staying away from you was the right thing to do. Someone who had presented themselves as a protector. But now, the story was beginning to look different. Your soulmate asked, "Why would they do that?" And this time, the answer came, fear. That was the word, fear. Someone had been afraid of what would happen if you and your soulmate became too close. Perhaps they feared losing influence. Perhaps they feared family conflict. Perhaps they believed you were not right for one another. Perhaps they had their own reasons that had nothing to do with your actual relationship. But whatever the reason, they interfered. And the consequences became much bigger than they anticipated. The separation lasted longer than anyone expected. Feelings remained buried. Questions remained unanswered. And two people who might have spoken openly instead learned to live with silence. Your soulmate may have spent years thinking you chose not to fight for them. You may have spent years thinking they chose not to fight for you. And meanwhile, another person's words stood between you. That is why this revelation is so painful. Because sometimes the tragedy is not that love disappeared. The tragedy is that two people believed it had. Now, my child, I want you to imagine what happened after your soulmate heard this. They did not immediately become angry. First came disbelief, then memories, then realization, then regret. They began asking about specific moments. Did they know I still cared? Yes. Did they know I wanted to contact them? Yes. Did they know I was waiting? The person hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Your soulmate looked away, because now they were realizing something unbearable. Someone may have known how much they cared. Someone may have known how much you cared. And still, the silence continued. This is where your soulmate's heart began to break open, not because they suddenly stopped loving you, because they realized they may never have stopped. They had simply learned to live around the absence. They had built routines around the emptiness. They had convinced themselves that missing you was normal. They had called it nostalgia. They had called it memory. They had called it the past. But last night, the past stopped behaving like the past. It became present again. Your soulmate looked at the old messages. They read them carefully, and one particular message caught their attention, a message from you, a message they had never seen before. The person across from them said, "There is something else." Your soulmate looked up. The other person opened another conversation. Then they turned the phone around. Your soulmate read the first line. Their breathing changed, because the message was written on a night when they believed you had already chosen someone else. But the message said the opposite. You had been trying to explain. You had been trying to reach them. You had been trying to say something that might have changed everything. But the message was never delivered. Someone had stopped it. Someone had intercepted it. Someone had decided your soulmate should never see it, and now, years later, your soulmate was reading it for the first time. Imagine that moment. The room is quiet, the phone is in their hands, the words are right there, and suddenly, a person realizes they have been grieving a relationship under a misunderstanding. They thought you rejected them. You thought they rejected you, but the truth may have been that both of you were waiting for a message that never arrived. That is the kind of revelation that can shake the strongest person. Your soulmate looked up and asked one question: why did nobody tell me this? The person across from them looked away. They said, because someone thought they were protecting you. And your soulmate answered something quietly, but who was protecting me from whom? No one spoke. That question remained hanging in the air, and then came the revelation that made the entire meeting feel different. The person your soulmate was with last night had not called them there merely to discuss the past. They had something else. Something they had promised themselves they would only reveal if your soulmate was finally ready. A photograph, an old recording, a message, evidence of a conversation. Something that could identify exactly who had influenced the separation. Your soulmate reached for it, but before the person handed it over, their phone rang. They looked at the screen. Their face changed. They did not answer. Your soulmate asked, "Who is that?" The person turned the phone face down. The phone rang again, and again. Your soulmate understood immediately. Someone knew where they were. Someone knew they were talking. Someone was trying to stop the conversation. That was the moment the atmosphere changed completely, because now this was no longer simply a meeting about old memories. Someone was afraid of what might be revealed. Your soulmate stood up. They asked, "Did they know you were going to tell me?" The person remained silent, and that silence was an answer. Your soulmate looked toward the door, then back at the phone, then at the evidence sitting between them. They finally understood that there was another layer to the story. Someone had been watching, someone had been protecting a secret, and someone was now afraid that the secret was about to become impossible to contain. My beloved child, this is where I want you to pause. Do not imagine betrayal where there is no proof. Do not turn fiction into suspicion about real people. Let this story remind you that appearances are incomplete without context. The person beside your soulmate may not be a lover. They may be the person holding the missing truth, and the most important question may not be who were they with. It may be what did they discover while they were there. Because before your soulmate left that meeting, they received one final piece of information. A name, a date, and a location. The location was connected to the night everything between you changed. The date was one you remembered, and the name was someone you never suspected. Your soulmate looked at the evidence one more time. Then they made a decision. They were not going home to forget this. They were not going to pretend they had never heard it. They were not going to accept another explanation without questioning it. They were going to confront the person who had influenced the separation. But there was one problem. That person was already waiting for them, and when your soulmate arrived, they discovered that someone else was there too, someone who had been silent for years. Someone who knew the entire story, someone who had been present on the night your soulmate walked away from you, and before your soulmate could say a single word, that person looked directly at them and said, "I know why you really left them." Your soulmate froze, because the person continued with the sentence nobody expected to hear. You left because you believed they had betrayed you. Then came the pause, a long, unbearable pause, and finally, the person whispered the truth. They never betrayed you. You were shown the wrong message. Your soulmate stared at them, then they asked the question that could open everything, then where is the original message? And the person slowly reached into their pocket, pulling out something that had been hidden for all these years.